Welcome to the NBA Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Brent Hyde, and taking a look at tonight's NBA action. If you're playing over on FanDuel, it kicks off at 8 o'clock, where DraftKings it starts at 7. I'm okay with the leaving the 7 o'clock game off tonight just because, as you were kind of talking before the show, it's that Memphis-Chicago is at 8 o'clock, and that's probably the most noteworthy news game that we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, we can just basically shorten this entire podcast and just only break down the 3 late night games because there's really not a whole lot of appeal about the other games except for Memphis-Chicago. And honestly, given Memphis's recent injury reporting history and the fact that Chicago just got busted by the league for benching Robin Lopez and Holiday, honestly, who knows what the hell is going to go on with those rotations tonight. So we can just skip all of it and just go to the 3 late night games if you want.
I mean, when you look at the 3 late night games, it's, Pelicans, Kings, you got Nuggets, Cavs, and Magic, Lakers, all sitting over 220 total. And then everything else is just ultimate crap.
Yeah, pretty much.
So, first game here, Utah, Indiana. This is over on DraftKings. Look at the Utah side here first. Derek Favors questionable for tonight's game. If he sits out, I kind of expect Jake Crowder to probably pick up a few extra minutes. Maybe they slide in some other guys. But I expect Crowder to probably get the most boost there.
Crowder will get a little bit of a boost. They started Jerebko last game. He would obviously get a little bit of a boost. He played 20 minutes. All these value guys are going to be a little bit interesting if Derek Favors is out. Even Joe Ingles is somebody that you can target. He obviously had a big game against Orlando. It is a little bit of a tougher matchup going up against Indiana, but he's another guy you would expect to get a few extra field goal attempts. So I think all 3 of those guys are a little bit interesting if Favors is out tonight. So feel free to sprinkle them in if you're dying to get exposure to this game. But it's mostly Rudy Gobert for me going up against a Pacers defense that has been, terrible against centers all season long, and Gobert has just been on an absolute freaking tear recently. So he's the guy that I'm most interested in from this side. And like I said, you can sprinkle in the value options if you really want to.
Yeah, 3 straight double-doubles, and has 9 blocks over his last 3 games. I don't mind Gobert. I kind of wish it was a better spot for guys like Rubio and Mitchell, just because generally when you get a split slates where FanDuel leaves one game off and DraftKings has the other, people tend to just kind of skip it on both sites, which always lowers the ownership. So you're probably going to get Gobert at super low ownership here tonight.
Yeah, you probably will. And obviously he has massive upside. Even his elevated price tag is up to 8,400 over on DraftKings. But he has 50 fantasy point upside. We just saw it against the Timberwolves. We saw 47-48 against the Kings and the Magic. So we know he can get you there. And if you're going to get him at really low ownership on tonight's slate, that's a good way to kick off the night.
Yep. Anyone else from Utah?
If you're dying to get some Mitchell or Rubio exposure, you can. I don't know that they're priced where I'm really that interested in either one of them. But no, not really anyone else.
Indiana side of things here, I don't really have a ton of interest. I will say Bogdanovic has been a guy who's been playing pretty well, still fairly cheap. But still, Utah's really kind of tightened up defensively of late. I'm not super thrilled with this Indiana side either.
No, I'm not really either. You can sprinkle in some Bogdanovic just because he's been playing extremely well recently. The minutes have been there for him. The field goal attempts have been there for him. And he obviously coming off a very big game against the Bucks. And Oladipo, he's still a guy that you can feel pretty comfortable with in cash games. But there's not a whole lot to like about this Indiana side of the game.
No, I'm not looking at Turner. I think Thaddeus Young might see a little bit of a minutes drop. I think Trevor Booker's expected to make his debut tonight, which, the one thing you've kind of always liked about Young is the fact that he's just going to play 35-plus minutes, and maybe that kind of starts to trend down a little bit.
Maybe, and it is obviously a Trevor Booker revenge game, so, there is that.
Trevor Booker's going to start racking up revenge games here like Isaiah Thomas pretty soon.
Yeah, he's going to start having revenge against just about everybody.
Moving on here to this Memphis and Chicago game, 209 total. Memphis, I think, is Jarrell Martin's questionable. Ben McLemore is expected here to be probable in play. It was a personal issue set out. We're still dealing with the guards being out, Evans, Chalmers, Harrison. It's not a fun Memphis team.
We think they're going to be out. We don't
Yeah,
know.
who the hell
Who
knows?
knows? Because who was it? Deontay Davis that was, or yeah, Deontay Davis that was out, ruled out last game, and then he ended up playing, and Jerome Martin was probable, and he ended up being out. So honestly, who knows who's going to be in and out in this matchup tonight? But I don't know. I think you can sprinkle in the Macklemores and the Kobe Simmons guys, even Xavier Wraith and Mays. If you're dying to get exposure, like you can sprinkle them all in. I don't think any of them have tournament winning upside, but they're all fine cash options. The guy I'm most interested in is going to be JaMychal Green. I wrote him up in the tournament article. The dude's just been absolutely insane recently, playing out of his mind. Trevor Booker expected to play 10 minutes Wednesday, so no revenge for Trevor Booker, but JaMychal Green, dude's just, I mean, what is he, like 8 of his last 10 games, he has double-digit rebounds. He's playing extremely freaking well recently, so he's a guy, even at his elevated price tag, I do have a lot of interest in.
Yeah, I like him, and obviously, love the matchup against Chicago. 30th in defensive efficiency against power forwards over the last 10 games. A team that doesn't rebound well, so like you expect another double-double here. Like you said, I don't mind that price. Like it's more than fair. I will be going the balanced approach tonight. I don't see myself kind of paying up for any of these huge price guys. So I think like Green's going to fit in pretty nicely.
Yeah, he's a guy that I'm kind of just forcing into my lineups because you feel comfortable that he's going to get the minutes and the production should be there for him. And there's just, I mean, you do want to get some exposure to this terrible Chicago defense, and like I feel pretty comfortable in the fact that JaMychal Green's going to be the best guy to do it.
Yep. And like Marcus Gasol, like he's picked up his play a little bit. I don't mind him here, but like I don't know how much I'm going to get exposure to just because I don't think he's going to be able to fit into my lineups at his price. Like it hasn't really come down.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm going to be too terribly interested. He makes for a solid cash game option, but outside of tournaments, like I just don't know that I'm really going to be targeting him here. Like on DraftKings, I would rather use Gobert. But yeah, I think in cash games, he's a fairly safe option to consider.
Yeah. I mean, Memphis, like as long as they're in the lineup, like they're decent cashing guys, just because they are so cheap and can help you afford like the LeBrons and Davises tonight.
Yeah, like as long as we get confirmation before lock that these guys are actually playing, you can feel free to sprinkle them in. I think I did misspeak a little bit. I don't know that you can use Xavier Wraith and Mays in cash games, just because I don't know what his role is going to be with Ben McLemore back. That being said, he did show that he can hang in the NBA last game. I think he would make a decent tournament option tonight. He's obviously going to face a much softer defense than the Spurs last time out.
Chicago side things, as you mentioned, Robin Lopez, Justin Holiday, 2 guys that might jump back into the rotation. NBA did clamp down a little bit. That would definitely mess with some stuff that we've been dealing with. We've had a little bit of consistent rotations over the last week, and we've gotten news about, obviously Portis jumping into the lineup, Nwaba jumping into the lineup, and that's kind of been pretty true. So I don't know what to make of this Bulls team. Like, I feel like I'm going to have to kind of see and wait for some news to pop out because it affects everyone.
Yeah, I really am hoping that we get some sort of news about what's going to happen with these rotations now that the Bulls are getting in trouble for benching healthy players. I don't know if they're going to actually do right by Lopez and Holiday and actually give them significant minutes, or if they're going to throw a temper tantrum like a 2-year-old and just be like, fine, we'll play him, but only play him for like 4 minutes. So hopefully we get a little bit of news. I think Robin Lopez, especially on DraftKings, is really, really interesting at his price. He's 3,500. If we get news that he's going to play a decent amount of minutes, I think he would definitely be a great option to get in some of the studs. But like basically until we get news, it's just really, really tough to trust any of these guys. I think Nwaba still a solid option at his price tag. We like targeting him against teams that lack rim protection. Memphis Grizzlies, not a great rim protection team this season. So he would maybe be the only guy that I really have a ton of interest in. And then if we get news that Robin Lopez is going to play like 5 minutes, then I think we can go back to the Bobby Portis train now that everyone maybe is going to be, jumping off after he burned us last game.
Yeah, like I like Nwaba here. He's a big guy, just been casually tossing in night in and night out. Like, what you're going to expect out of him. He has those nice peripheral stats, especially on FanDuel with the defense. Like, he's not a big scorer, so when he racks up those steals and blocks, like he can get to 30 fantasy points. Yeah, I don't mind Portis. Like if Lopez is going to be pretty limited, I would love to see the Bulls actually just line up Lopez and Holiday right at tip. They win the tip, call a timeout, and then take them out.
It very well could be how that happens. I assume they'll probably get even more trouble for that. Like, I honestly think like the NBA probably didn't really care that much, and then there was probably a grievance filed by one of the players to the Players Association, and so like Michelle Roberts was all in Adam's ear about doing this. I think that's probably how this ended up shaking out. So we'll see what happens. Like I said, hopefully we get news because it would make Denzel Valentine interesting. It would make Zach LaVine and Chris Dunn a couple interesting options as well if those guys aren't actually going to get significant minutes.
Yep. I kind of don't mind like Levine either way here. I know he's coming off a bad game against Boston. It's kind of been a little bit pedestrian over the previous two, but like the usage and minutes are still going to be there. Like his price has dropped a little bit. Like he's only 6,800 on FanDuel. It's a reasonable price. Like he was creeping up in the 7Ks recently.
Yeah, he's still a fine option, I think, in tournaments. Obviously, we know Memphis defense not that great now that they're, basically starting a bunch of G League players. Over the last 10 games, are eighth in defensive efficiency against the shooting guard, 30th against the point guard. But at times this season, they have actually really struggled against shooting guards. So I think you can sprinkle in Levine in tournaments and Chris Dunn as well. He's a guy that, can rack up their peripheral stats as well.
Yep. Toronto and Detroit next one here. Toronto favored by 5.5, 212 over under. We get these Toronto teams. They played twice already this year. Some of these guys are at reasonable prices for Toronto. Like I'm enamored with the Lowry price, especially against a Detroit team that's just been awful against point guards lately. And we've seen Lowry play pretty well against Detroit in limited minutes. I mean, 37 fantasy points per game and just 28 minutes average this year. Only 7,200 on DraftKings.
Yeah, he's definitely interesting in the spot. Obviously, only played 23 minutes last night, so he's pretty well rested. I saw a strange tweet. Like, I don't think anything actually came of it because they were up by like 17 when it happened. But like, he went to the locker room late in the game against Atlanta. Like I said, at that point they were up by 17, so it may have just been just trying to get back there and get a little extra rest or treatment or whatever. So I would definitely just keep an eye on the Toronto news today. Also, DeLon Wright sprained his big toe. So maybe he sits out tonight. That could, sprinkle in an extra minute or two for Kyle Lowry. But he's a guy that I do have a lot of interest in. Like, I even think, given the fact that we pretty much could guarantee that the Raptors are just going to blow everybody out the rest of the season, that, like, he's still a cash viable option at his price. I think the two guys I'm most interested in are going to be Jonas Valanciunas and Serge Ibaka. Like, as far as the starting lineups goes, Detroit's been really bad against opposing front courts over the last 10 games, 29th and 22nd defensive efficiency against power forwards and centers. And we know these two guys, especially Jonas Valanciunas, can rack up big games in limited minutes. We saw him put up a solid game last night in limited minutes. We've seen him put up decent games against Detroit at times this season. And the same goes for Serge Ibaka. So those would be the two starters I have the most interest in outside of Lowry.
And I forgot to dig in. I think it was the last time that Valanciunas played Drummond. I think he has a pretty good history. Like I'm gonna go back and look. I know he struggled the last game out, but was very solid in that first game against Detroit. Because like there's a few guys that you wouldn't kind of expect, but like Robin Lopez and I believe Valanciunas are two guys that just have like excellent BVP numbers against Drummond.
I am gonna pull it up right now
because I want to say that's the case, but yeah, I like the Serge Ibaka call. Like Detroit's 29th defensive efficiency against power forwards the last 10 games. Griffin's not a defender that I'm shying away from.
No. So the last 5 seasons by game, 37, 28, 31, 29, 48, 41, 30, 18, 37, 19, 48, 27, 23, 27, 43, 12.
Yeah, so definitely some big games in there against Drummond.
Yeah, and obviously we know it's a decent matchup here. Like I know, like fantasy points allowed wise, it looks really bad on paper, but it's actually a pretty solid matchup for both him and Ibaka.
Yep. Do you have any interest in like the backup front court guys here?
Yeah, I think you can still look at Fred VanVleet, even if DeLon Rice is able to suit up. Obviously, we saw him come out and play 29 minutes, shot really poorly, 1 of 7 from the field, but still put up 28 fantasy points. So he's a guy that you could look at. Pascal Siakam, Jakob Poeltl, two guys that are racking up solid games and limited minutes pretty much every single night. So you can look there, and even CJ Miles, he put up a big game last night. It is a decent matchup, and like he's just going to get you. He's going to score. Like that's pretty much all he's going to do. Sometimes he can rack up a few extra rebounds, but like you're relying on a guy to shoot really well, and he has been shooting a little bit better of late. So I don't even mind him as a value option.
Yeah, especially at small forward. Like small forward's pretty weak, especially on FanDuel. Like he's only 3,500 there. If you're punting the position, definitely don't mind it.
Yeah, small forward on FanDuel is pretty rough today. So like it might be a viable strategy to just punt it and use like someone like CJ Miles.
Detroit side of things here, we've seen Drummond play really well against Toronto this year, but he's kind of been struggling a little bit of late. If you're looking for consistent upside, like I think that's gone out of him. But I don't mind him in GPPs just because I don't think a lot of people are going to go that direction.
I think he's an excellent tournament option. Obviously, we've seen the upside out of him even recently with the almost 60 fantasy points against the Miami Heat. He's been really good against the Raptors this season. We know the Raptors at times have really struggled against big men like of Drummond's caliber. So I think he's an excellent tournament option, not someone that you're looking at in cash because he couldn't just end up playing limited minutes if this game gets out of control.
Yeah, that's kind of the worry like I have for both bigs. Like I don't have a ton of interest in like Blake Griffin here. I think at similar prices, I'm going to be probably looking at like Julius Randle instead. Not that I don't mind Griffin. Like if you're building a ton of lineups, I guess you can get some exposure, but like he's not a guy that I'm really high on.
Yeah, I'm not terribly high on him either. As you said, if you're building a bunch of lineups, you can sprinkle in some exposure, but like I would just rather get like the Aaron Gordons and Julius Randles and players like that are in significantly better spots to attack tonight.
Secondary guys here, I don't really have a ton of interest in like Thea Smith and Reggie Bullocks and James Ennis's here.
They're going to be interesting targets again if you're punting small forward over on FanDuel. They're going to be guys that you may end up having to use, especially if Stanley Johnson and Luke Kennard are out. Both of those guys are questionable. You can expect big minutes out of Bullock and James Ennis. So the only way that I would really consider them is if the aforementioned two players are out and you're just punting the small forward position.
Anyone else want to talk about here? Houston and Milwaukee, 216 over under. Houston favored by 6. For the amount of stars that are in this game, I don't have a ton of interest. Like we're building up to the 3-game stretch here where there's a lot of options. So, I don't have a ton of interest in like Harden tonight. Like I said, I think I'm going to go a balanced approach instead. Clint Capella is probably the guy that I like the most here.
Yeah, Capella is definitely interesting. Obviously, Milwaukee really bad against opposing centers this season. They're one of the worst teams against centers. 27th in fantasy points allowed, giving up almost 54 per game. And their defensive stalwart, Mr. Tyler Zeller, is going to be doubtful for this game. So that just boosts Capella's upside right there. But Capella coming off a bad game, like I guess he was somewhat chalky last night, which was a little bit interesting. Let a bunch of people down, so that definitely has me interested in him tonight if people are going to be off him because they got burned by him last night. Obviously, if you want to roll James Harden, feel free. He's going to be a guy that you can feel comfortable in cash games, going to get you 48, 50 plus fantasy points. Again, in tournaments, I'm going the balanced route just like you, so I'm not going to be forcing him in my tournament lineup. So Capella definitely, Harden, cash. Chris Paul coming off a somewhat solid game against OKC. He's at least a little bit interesting. I know him and Eric Bledsoe have had some point guard battles against each other in the past. So there's a little narrative there. And Trevor Ariza is still just playing a bunch of minutes. So I think he's a fine value option.
Yeah, especially on FanDuel, like he's still just 5,200. Like we said, that FanDuel small forward position is awful. It's LeBron and Giannis, and there's like a $5,000 drop after that. So that kind of says it all.
Yeah. The small forward's rough over there. So you're locking in someone that at least has a safe minutes floor, and Trevor Ariza might not be a terrible idea.
Yeah. As far as other guys, do you have any interest in like Eric Gordon here or PJ Tucker or anyone?
Tucker, again, just a value option that you can sprinkle in if you're needing to pay down at the position. He, playing mid to high 20s. shooting okay the last couple games. So that's at least a little bit appealing, especially against a Milwaukee team that has really struggled at times against 3-point shooters. Eric Gordon, I don't know that I want to. His price is, what is it, 50? It's up over 5K. I don't know if I really want to go there tonight.
Yeah, like I think if I'm choosing between the values, like Ariz is going to be the guy that I choose.
Yeah, that's definitely the way that would go.
Milwaukee side of things here tonight. I like the Tyler Zeller injury report. That was nice. But this is a team I don't mind getting exposure to. I don't think they're going to be all that popular. I don't mind sprinkling some Giannis. I think Bledsoe is intriguing at his price. I like taking point guards against Chris Paul because people will still hop off. And I think because point guard's not really there's no solidified stud, you can take some shots on guys like Bledsoe here.
Yeah, I actually do like Bledsoe a decent amount here, especially given his price. It's still really cheap. He's been consistently over 40 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games. I think he outshot Giannis last game. He had 22 field goal attempts. Giannis ended up only having 16. That's a little bit interesting. It could just be, noise, but who knows? So yeah, I think Eric Bledsoe is a very interesting option. As I mentioned, there's a little bit of history between Bledsoe and Chris Paul, so maybe that fires up Eric Bledsoe in the spot. We've seen him go off and in these narrative street games before. Giannis, like, down to 10-4 on DraftKings, that's a really, really appealing price for him, and 11-5 on FanDuel. Like, I think on FanDuel, unless you're just completely punting the position, you're probably just going to have to lock in like Giannis or LeBron at that small forward position. I might end up going Giannis in this spot.
I think for $1,000 cheaper, like it makes a little bit of sense. The guy I have actually quite a bit of interest in GPP tonight is Chris Middleton. At his price, he actually hasn't been a great floor guy of late, like for his price tag. We've seen kind of shots be a little bit volatile, like 7, 14, 21, 10 over the last, few games. Some tougher matchups, like I kind of like him here as a potential breakout spot, and not a lot of people beyond him. And the fact that he's only 6,600 on FanDuel is pretty nice, and 6,900 on DK too. Like, two prices that, usually we're paying, mid sevens for Middleton.
Yeah, and Houston has struggled against spot-up shooters this season. Middleton's spotting up on about 21% of his possession, so it is a spot where if he's actually able to hit his shots, something that he hasn't been able to do at consistently recently, then he will actually end up putting up a good game. So I don't mind to call him. We know the minutes are going to be there for him. So in a fast-paced game against the Houston team on a back-to-back after a slugfest against Corey Brewer and the Oklahoma City Thunder last night, I don't mind it at all.
Just subtle digs here. Subtle digs. Front court, do you have any interest at all, like Henson or Parker?
Parker is still cheap enough to consider. Like, he's still not playing a bunch of minutes. But like the Rockets have been really solid against power forwards for the majority of the season, so that is a little concerning. But he's still cheap enough to consider. And man, I really was high on defensive stalwart Tyler Zeller, but I'm heartbroken that I can't play him tonight.
Let's move on. Let's get into some positive games here. New Orleans and Sacramento, 224 over under. This is obviously the start of kind of the real slate. You're going to expect a lot of ownership over these next 3 games. We'll start with Anthony Davis, another monster performance last night. Even he can play the trio. If you were playing Anthony Davis bingo, he went to the locker room, he put up a double-double, got 3 blocks. Like, he's 13K on FanDuel. Like, he's basically got to get me like 80 to 90 fantasy points in GPPs for me to be really happy about it. 11-3 on DraftKings. The fact that he's still not moving, like, I think you could still plug him in and feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, obviously, to say using Anthony Davis in cash on FanDuel at 13K is a little, it's playing with fire. But like, I think he's definitely a solid cash game option over on FanDuel, because especially in this matchup against the Kings, who we know are really bad against opposing big men. They're terrible rebounding. They can't defend the rim. Like, this seems like a spot where he could come out and just put up, one of those monster like 100 fantasy point games. I said I wasn't going to do it, but I'm just going to go off on a little bit of a tangent real quick. And I know I've joked about the Anthony Davis being made of glass and consistent injury stuff before, but like, can we stop with the brow is hurt again BS on Twitter every time he goes to the locker room? Like, I looked it up right before we started recording. He's only missed 6 games this season. There's only been like 6 games where he's played less than 30 minutes, and like 2 of those were like 20-point blowouts. So let's just stop with the Anthony Davis is always hurt stuff, please.
And I think Curry's actually gone to the locker room more times this season than Davis has.
Probably. Like I don't have the patience to go through and look at who's gone to the locker room how many times and stuff, but like it hasn't been as bad this season as people are making it out to be with Anthony Davis.
Oh. But yeah, like you said, like especially with like the Memphis value, like we talked about some guys that are sub 4,500 on FanDuel, so like there's enough value to make Davis work. GPPs, like I'm still going to be looking at some other directions. I can build a GPP lineup with Davis and feel good about it, then I will. But if not, like you said, like the Gordons, the Randalls, like I'm looking for that balance, and I can still get exposure through New Orleans with Drew Holiday, Rajon Rondo have all been playing really well.
Revenge game Rondo.
I know it is. We get national televised. Last night was very solid, and then we get revenge game Rondo against the Kings.
Yeah, buddy. I still like Rondo in this matchup. I mean, the dude's averaging like 11 assists over his past 5 games. We know the Kings have been really bad against point guards recently. I mean, you're letting Jeff Teague drop like 45 fantasy points. Damian Lillard's coming in and dropping like 50 real points on you. I like De'Aaron Fox as a rookie prospect and all that stuff, but his defensive skill set is not good. So like seems like a spot where you could definitely get exposure to Rondo even at an elevated price tag and feel pretty comfortable that he's going to come out and put up a big game. And you mentioned Drew Holiday. Kings have been really bad against shooting guards at times this season, especially those that can spot up. And Holiday is a decent spot up shooter. So if Davis, if we get word that Davis is going to be out or something like that, or is questionable, like I would just be locking Drew Holiday in my lineups. You can still get exposure regardless, though, because we know he's going to, he's going to be in a good spot to produce tonight.
Yeah, it was nice to see Holiday because Holiday didn't shoot really well last night against the Clippers, but I dished out 17 assists.
Yeah, that's freaking ridiculous.
It's the first time in 8 games that he's shot under 50% last night. Like Holiday's been shooting extremely well of late. The scoring's been there, like the peripheral numbers have been there. Like it's a bad rebounding Kings team. Like you should be able to get 5-6 rebounds here. Expect a steal or a block or two. So I'm not worried about the Holiday price. I will gladly pay it if I'm not going Davis. I want exposure to this New Orleans team.
Yeah, for sure. Like it's definitely a good way to go. And I guess we do need to talk about like in the case that Anthony Davis does sit, isn't able to play tonight because of the hip pain or whatever. You would definitely want to get some exposure to Mirotic, who would be in an excellent spot. It's only like a 78-minute sample size, but like 1.4, almost 1.4 fantasy points per minute with a almost 30% usage rate without Davis on the floor. You could get some exposure to Etuan Moore. Emeka Okafor would definitely be a solid value option to consider, and even Cheikh Diallo would be someone that you could consider if Anthony Davis does not suit up tonight.
Yeah, like at the moment, like there's no indication that he could, but obviously he was in some pain, so anything could happen. Obviously, on a day after, things flare up even more.
Yeah, for sure. It's just something that you're going to want to pay close attention to.
Sacramento here, we got some guys on the injury report as usual. Basically, the entire front court is banged up. This is going to be something that we have to keep an eye on. It looks like Zach Randolph is the only probable one right now.
Zach Randolph and Costa Koufos are the ones that are most likely going to play because Willie Cauley-Stein is out and Scala Bissiere is questionable. So they're going to need more than like one actual big man. So that means like you're gonna probably get a decent amount of Costa Koufos, maybe a decent amount of Zach Randolph, and then if Scala Bissiere is able to play, like he'll eat up a decent amount of minutes. But coming off with a sore knee, like that does concern me a little bit about his availability tonight.
Yeah, Randolph has crushed New Orleans this year. I'd be very intrigued at his price, and especially as a correlation play in this game. Like Randolph's decent value, like he's 5,800 on DraftKings. You know, the usage is there, like that potential is there for him to go off in this matchup.
Yeah, it really is. Like he's been playing limited minutes recently because Scalabasier has been going like bananas, and Costa Koufos has been playing really well. So like it's led to limited minutes. I think you can sprinkle in some tournament exposure if we don't have the Scal news prior to lock. If we get news that Scal is out, then I would be plugging a bunch of Zach Randolph in my lineups. And I wrote up Costa Koufos in the tournament article. I think he's a great tournament play tonight, given the fact that we, already know that Willie Cauley Stein is out. That has led to more minutes for Koufos already. And going up against Anthony Davis, like Costa Koufos is not a great defender, but he is probably their best defensive big man that they have. That's a sad state of affairs, but like he's actually played decent amount of minutes against the Pelicans already this season, and he's performed really well. He's averaging almost 30 fantasy points against them. So I think he's a guy that's going to see even more minutes tonight if Skal Labissiere is out. And even if Labissiere plays, like I still think 24, 25 minutes and a 30 fantasy point ceiling is in play for Koufos.
Yep, definitely. As far as like the backcourt guys go, I mean, all kind of just producing at similar rates here. Like we've seen Buddy Hield be playing pretty well. He's averaging 24 fantasy points over his last five. Bogdanovich 29 over his last five. Fox 27 over his last five. Like those have been the three guys that have had solidified minutes here of late. All at similar prices. Like, do you have a preference here?
I think Fox is a solid option, just like all around as far as tournaments and cash games goes. We've seen his minutes trending downwards a little bit over the last two, and those have been in close games. And I think some of that has to do with Frank Mason. His minutes are starting to trend upwards, 19, 20, and 19 over the last three games. So that does concern me a little bit, but I still like Fox here. I'm probably leaning Bogdanovich over Buddy Hield just because Bogdanovich isn't as dependent on, hitting 20 shots to be able to hit value on a nightly basis. But that elevated price tag is kind of tough to stomach. But I think I'm leaning Fox, Bogdanovich, and then Buddy Hield. Hield would definitely be the tournament option for me.
Yeah, look, I don't mind getting exposure to all three here, and I think Bogdanovich is maybe just grades out a little bit over Fox for me, but I definitely it's splitting hairs between those two.
Yeah, they're both excellent options in the spot.
Yep. Anyone else from this one?
No.
Cleveland and Denver next year, 231 over under. Denver favored by 3. We just saw this game the other night. Obviously going to be a game that we want to target. LeBron James, if you want to go ahead, like it's the same thing. Like if you want to pay up and get him, like he's got the triple-double upside, put up 50 fantasy points in 28 minutes against Detroit, put up over 60 against this Denver team just 2 games ago. I don't mind getting exposure. Like you said, Giannis is a little bit cheaper. Like we're still competing with Davis as far as like top end options go. So it's kind of just pick your poison.
Yeah, it comes down to every single night. It's the same story. Like if you want to play these studs, feel free. Like there's nothing at this point in the season. We're 80% through the season. There's nothing at this point in the season that we can say that's going to make people be like, oh my God, I love him more than the other guy. But yeah, LeBron, if you want to play him, it's an excellent spot. And I mean, it's still one of those situations where he hasn't been below 50 fantasy points since like February 6th. So like you're pretty comfortable locking him in cash games and knowing that he's going to get you, 50 plus fantasy points. The rest of this Cleveland side of this game though is definitely interesting. Obviously, we still have Larry Nance, chalk Larry Nance tonight going up against a really poor Denver front court. We know he's gonna get the starts, play a bunch of minutes. We saw the huge ceiling game out of him last game. I'm afraid to fade him in all formats because I know he has the ability to put up that massive game. That being said, like I still have some concerns about foul trouble going up against a guy like Jokic.
It'll help Nance if Jokic doesn't see the floor in the fourth again.
Yeah, yeah,
which we will get to. I like Nance here. Like you look at Denver, like they've been pretty pedestrian against centers of late. The one thing I will say is that the huge price bump to Nance is 7,500 on FanDuel is a little concerning for me. Like, and I kind of like some other options, around that range. But like you said, like he's an extremely tough fade. It's a good spot, high energy guy. You expect him to just be flying around and getting a ton of peripheral stats here.
Yeah, like I mean, it's one of those situations, especially on FanDuel. It's really scary because you get the extra blocks and steal, you get the extra points for blocks and steals, and I mean, he only had what 2 steals against Detroit last time against Denver. He didn't actually have any blocks and steals, but like he usually racks up multiple blocks and steals in a game, and I just gotta say, like, I think being in Cleveland is probably like the absolute best thing that could ever happen to Larry Nance Jr. because he just looks so good playing alongside LeBron James. It's really fun to watch him.
Yeah, yeah, it's been incredible. Like he's been a guy that's obviously worked out for Cleveland. Obviously fantasy wise, like he's been a huge bump. Um, Look at some other options. Like I don't mind looking at George Hill tonight. Still fairly cheap. It's a good spot against Denver. Like targeting point guards against Denver. Put up 25 fantasy points against them last time out. Played 33 minutes. I'm not really concerned with the game against Detroit either in a blowout. And he only played 23 minutes. I expect him to be back around 30.
Yeah, and it's an excellent spot for him tonight. Obviously, you mentioned they do really struggle against point guards. They're one of the worst point guard defenses in the league. They also really struggle against spot up shooters, and that's something that George Hill's been doing a lot since coming to Cleveland. Like almost 26% of his possessions come out of the spot up, and so that's really promising against a team that has really struggled against spot up shooters. So I think George Hill is a great play in all formats, and we've seen upside out of him. And at 4,700 on DraftKings, that's a 47 on FanDuel as well. That's a really tough fade tonight. The rest of the guys like Rodney Hood, Jordan Clarkson, I don't mind sprinkling them in. Hood's probably the tournament option with Clarkson being the cash game play in the spot, but I think it starts with George Hill from that backcourt for me.
Yep, I agree with you there. Anyone else from Cleveland you want to talk about?
Um, I don't know about J.R. Smith, man. No, I don't know that I want to go there tonight. Like I know he's coming off a huge game against Denver last time they played, 7 to 12 from the field, 29 fantasy points. But like, man, he has to rack up like 18, 20 real points to even really get you there on a nightly basis. So I think I'd rather focus on the other guys.
Yeah, I'm with you. Denver side of things here. Jokic didn't see the floor in the fourth last night. Like he's been very pedestrian since Millsap's come back. It's the scoring. Like the scoring's dropped down. I know, like he hasn't shot particularly well in the last 3 games, but I I don't know. I don't think I can pull a trigger on even in GPPs on Jokic at this point.
I mean, it's really scary to say that like he's a complete fade. So if you're building a bunch of lineups, obviously you do want to get a little bit of exposure to him. I haven't gone back and watched that game yet, but I did peep the box score late in that game, and I noticed that like their bench was the one that was like the only lineup that was in the positive. And so that probably had something to do with it. Like Malone's one of those guys. If his starting lineup is playing like absolute garbage, and I know Gary Harris was bad, I know Jamal Murray was bad, like Jokic was bad. Like if they're playing terrible, then he's just not going to play him. Like he's one of those coaches that isn't stuck to, oh my god, I had to roll my starters out there because they're my starters. If they're bad, they're bad. And so he rolled with the bench, and it's something of a concern, obviously, but like I think you could go back to the well with all of the starters here. Starting with Jokic again in tournaments, like sprinkling in some if you're building a bunch of lineups. But Gary Harris, I'm back. I'm going back to the well on Gary Harris. He made it in my tournament article. Like I was dead set on getting him in there before I even saw how bad he did against the Dallas Mavericks. Yeah, I'm just going back to that well. And something that's interesting that I noticed with Gary Harrison, at least it was interesting to me. It may not seem like that big of a deal, but the Nuggets have played like 60 something, 66 games or something like that. I think Harris has missed like 5 or 6. There's only been like 6 games this season where he hasn't scored in double figures, and six games where he hasn't attempted double digit field goals. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And like you're getting a guy that's playing like 38 minutes some nights, still playing a ton of minutes and jacking up a bunch of shots against a really bad defense. Like I'm all in on Gary Harris tonight.
Yeah, like I'm getting exposure to Denver through the backcourt and like Will Barton, who just continues to be very solid. Those are my two favorite guys from Denver here. Uh, Outside of like Jokic, like you said, like it really is tough to say no fade him. GPPs, like I said, if you're building a ton of lineups, go for it. I think Millsap's price now, like he's still been a great fantasy points per minute guy, but like I liked him when he was kind of at that price range where like I still was okay that he was playing 20, 24, 27 minutes. Like on the back to back, I'm a little concerned paying at this price for Millsap at a relatively strong position too.
Yeah, it is a pretty strong position. That being said, like it is a back to back, but he only played 20 minutes last night. He was another one of the guys that wasn't able to get back on the floor for the majority of the fourth quarter last night. Shot really poorly. I still think he's cash viable. Like we've seen him get, with that 34, 35 fantasy point, upside. I would expect his minutes to trend back into, the mid to high 20s tonight. So I think you can still roll him out in cash, but especially in tournaments, there's so many guys that are better upside options tonight.
Yeah, I think when just looking at like when you have JaMychal Green, like Kyle Kuzma, and Nance, and Gordon around, like Millsap kind of takes a back seat for me here.
Yeah, it's kind of the same way for me. And then like Wilson Chandler, cash viable, he's still playing really, really well. And as like a tournament guy to get maybe a little bit of exposure to if you think Jokic may end up, riding the bench or something like that, I don't necessarily mind sprinkling in a little plum dog millionaire.
No, I don't mind it either, especially in FanDuel where you got Wilson Chandler is really cheap, still at a small forward position, and Plumlee's always capable of having that big breakout game.
Yeah, I mean he's always one of those guys where like he's always going to play limited minutes, but like prior to the last few games, like he was a guy that was basically like playing like 20 minutes a night and getting you, 24, 29 sometimes fantasy points. So I think he's definitely an interesting tournament value option.
Yep. Anyone else here? Any interest in like Jamal Murray?
Man, it hurts me to say that I'm not interested in Jamal Murray in this spot, but yeah, I'm not going there tonight.
He's just too expensive. Like, and I don't see how you choose Murray like over Partner Harris.
Yeah, it's kind of the same way. And then like I don't see how you're choosing Murray over like some of the other options that we're going to get to. Like I'm still taking Isaiah Thomas over Murray and
Rondo.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Moving on here, last game of the night, Orlando and LA. Another barn burner here, 226 over under. Looking at this Orlando side, everyone's pretty much healthy here. We'll start with the front court. Aaron Gordon, good spot here. Like the upside. I like that his price has come down a little bit. Just another stellar kind of power forward option that has that big 40 plus fantasy point upside here.
Yeah, he was the first guy in my tournament article today. I just love the spot for him. Like I could read off all the stats that are in the article. I'll leave that to people clicking and reading. Please click and read my article. But yeah, I love him in the spot. Like he's coming off a down game against Utah. Obviously, it's against Utah. Like people have bad games against the Utah Jazz, but put up a solid outing against Memphis. Put up a big game against Detroit. Like we've seen the upside out of him since he's returned. The shot attempts, a couple double-digit field goal attempt games. We know the rebounding upside is there. I'm absolutely in love with Aaron Gordon in this spot.
What are your thoughts on Vucevic here? Like price tag is up a little bit here, but I mean been very solid since returning. He's 8,400 on FanDuel, which is a little bit steep. 7,700, like it was nice when he was 6,900 against the Jazz, but I know obviously the matchup algorithm, whatever they have going on, has bumped him up. Decent cash game guy. I'm kind of struggling to see if he has tournament upside here.
I think he still has tournament upside, especially over on DraftKings, where he's 7,700. I think you can use them all in all formats. I think FanDuel, you're probably looking more cash game. I think DraftKings, it's both formats. And just quick note, apparently the Cavaliers are now listing Jeff Green as probable. So that may take the shine off Larry Nance a little bit.
That's true. Especially at those prices.
Yeah, like I could have sworn he was supposed to be out for like 2 or 3 more games, but apparently not.
Well, it shouldn't surprise you.
Or maybe we get Grizzlied again tonight.
Oh God. Yeah, I think like Vucevic on FanDuel, like 8,400 is a little steep. Like you have Capella, who's 1,000 cheaper. You have some cheaper options like Kufos and Valanciunas and those types of guys to kind of take shots on. And I think even like Marc Gasol at the same price, like I might lean Gasol.
Yeah, I mean, I still think I'm probably higher on Vucevic than you are tonight. At least in cash games over on FanDuel, 8,400. Like, I don't know that I want to pay all the way up to 10K for Drummond on FanDuel. So getting someone like Vucevic at 84 or paying all the way down is probably the route that I would take.
Yep. Uh, as far as like other guys here, like we've seen kind of minutes be a little bit limited. Like production's been kind of like Fournier. Like I don't know, I can't get excited about like Fournier here. Really, any of the backcourt guards, even though it's a good matchup.
I like Augustine a significant amount. I think Shelvin Mack is obviously in play as a value option as well. He's just a guy, a decent fantasy point per minute producer. But I think Augustine at 5K on DraftKings is extremely interesting. I know he's cheap over on FanDuel too, 4,900. I think he has plenty of upside. Like we've seen it recently against Detroit, 40 fantasy points. I mean, he hasn't been terrible recently. I know he had a bad game against Utah, but again, it's against Utah. But for him to be 5K and have 25 plus fantasy point upside tonight, like that's pretty appealing against a terrible Lakers point guard defense.
Yeah, I guess I don't mind that. Do you like anyone else here? Like, we've seen Simmons kind of drop down off the map. Like his own just been kind of cutting into his workload a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm really looking at any of the other guys. It's basically Augustine and Gordon and Vucevic for me.
Yep. Lakers side of things here, plenty of options from this squad. Let's start with Julius Randle, just playing exceptionally well, like 40 fantasy points on average over his last 5 games. Good matchup here against Orlando. I don't care that the price is up. Like I'm gonna be going back to the well, and I feel like if you can't go and pay all the way up, like Kuzma's a couple thousand cheaper. He's been playing well in the absence of Ingram, so like you have options here.
Yeah, and now that we have the news about Jeff Green, like I think I would rather go Randall over Nance on FanDuel, given their prices. It's a little bit different story over on DraftKings, but I mean Randall's just one of those guys. Like 38, 40 fantasy points seems to be his floor, and he has massive upside, especially in a matchup like this. I know Orlando on the season has been not great against power forwards. They're 26 in fantasy points allowed. They've been a little bit better recently. I think they're sixth in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games. But we know there's a bunch of rebounding upside. We know there's upside for some block shots and things like that. So I love Randall in the spot. Like he's my second favorite Lakers option from this game.
And then when you look at like Brooke Lopez, obviously coming off a big game, like are you buying into it here?
Every time I bought into Lopez minutes and big games, like it's come back and bit me in the ass. He's a decent value tournament option, but like you cannot use him in cash games tonight.
No, I don't like cash games, but like now that Voos is back, I just love taking centers against Orlando even more so. But yeah, like I mean, the minutes just aren't going to be there. Like he's not going to play over 25, but obviously been a very strong fantasy points per minute player in this spot. And you're obviously maybe hoping that maybe if something happens and he can take advantage of like seeing upper 20s. But we saw him put up nearly 40 fantasy points against Portland in 26 minutes. He has that potential. Yeah, like GPPs, he's worth a look, especially on FanDuel. I think you can take a shot there at 5,800.
Yeah, that's kind of where I would probably be playing him. Like I think you're better off like with Costa Kufis or someone like that over on DraftKings.
Backcourt here, we have KCP playing a ton of minutes, playing really well. Price is a little bit obviously more expensive. Ball and KCP both got their prices jacked up quite a bit on FanDuel. Same with Thomas.
Yeah, I'm down with KCP. Yeah, you know me, down with the KCP. Um, it's really tough to fade a guy that's is playing like 40 freaking minutes a night, and with Josh Hart out and Brandon Ingram out, like we know the minutes are going to be there for him. He's shooting pretty well recently. He's got the rebounding upside against an Orlando team. They're giving up the third most rebounds to guards per game on the season. I think KCP is an excellent play. Lonzo Ball made it in my tournament article. Like I think he has 50 plus fantasy point upside in this matchup against an Orlando team that's like dead last in fantasy points allowed to the point guards on the season. Second to last, sorry. I'm not afraid. Like I know he's coming off a bad game last time out against Portland. That was kind of predictable. Portland's a decent rebounding team. Still shot okay, like 43% from three. Orlando, a bad 3-point defense. I think this is a great spot for Alonzo Ball. And then KCP, as I mentioned, you can obviously roll him out in all formats. He has a pretty high ceiling. And Isaiah Thomas is definitely an interesting tournament option given his price, especially on DraftKings at 6K. FanDuel, it's a little tougher, but like Thomas, still massive usage rate, still putting up a bunch of shots, playing a decent amount of minutes. So I don't even mind sprinkling in some Thomas there.
No, I don't either. And, hasn't been shooting particularly well. Like he's under 40% over his last 5 games, but still putting up right around 30 fantasy points per game. He gets a shot to drop here. Like we could see like a 30 real point game out of Thomas at some point soon.
To be fair, his shot really hasn't dropped almost all season long. So
that's true. I guess I'm just looking. I'm a small picture guy.
I mean, he's shooting like 37% on the entire season and like 28% from three. Like Corey Brewer has better numbers than that.
Oh, for the love of God, just let it go. I guess you know what? He's shooting 10% better than or sorry, not 10% better, just slightly better than his season average over his last 5 games.
Improvement.
So, yeah, I don't mind Thomas. Like I said, this Lakers team, you have options. If you can't get up to Randall, you can't get up to Ball. Like you have Thomas and Kuzma and Lopez, like as nice mid-range plays here. And this Lakers team is, one of the highest totals on the night. I think they're only second to where's it at? No, I don't have that tab here, but they're one of the higher totals teams. It's definitely a game you want to stack.
Yeah, and obviously we didn't really touch on Kuzma too much, but he's still another guy that you can get exposure to. He's gonna play a bunch of minutes without Brandon Ingram there. I mean, literally everybody from the Lakers side is just playing a bunch of minutes, which is great because they weren't really doing it last season. And the Lakers implied team total is 115.5. It is second to the Nuggets.
Yeah, so sign me up. Like you want some Lakers exposure. You could build your lineups within these last 3 games.
Yeah, like my current lineup right now outside of JaMychal Green has literally people from the last 3 games, and that's it.
Yeah, that's the way to go. Let's go highest score below 9K.
Below 9K. Lonzo Ball.
Ooh, I like it. I'm gonna go Gobert here, 8,400.
I can dig it.
So it was between him or Drew Holiday. It was a close call, but it's gonna wrap it up for us. You can check out dailyfantasycafe.com and check out Brent's GPP article up for tonight's slate, and we'll be back on Friday.
Good luck tonight.